Welcome, everybody, back to my podcast. This is Brian. I'm still putting out videos on the Constitution. I think it's very important that everybody learns the Constitution, because if you don't know the Constitution, you don't know your own rights and the law. And the cops and council and all over the government is going to hold you accountable for not knowing your own rights. So they're going to lie to you, they're going to tell you stuff, but unless you know your rights, you're going to get run over. Guaranteed. But Carl Miller is going to tell you about more stuff. And each video I have put out on Carl Miller is segments. It's over 5 hours long, the whole thing. I'm cutting it up so that way if you need to just do a certain segment, you can get to that certain segment. At least that's how I'm going to recognize it. But listen up to this guy. He knows the Constitution more than anybody. And I advise you to learn it. Here we go.
All right. Now we're going to bring up several arguments right here. We're going to bring up police powers. And we're going to bring up quo warranto. Quo warranto is a basic right that goes back to English law, ancient English law. Okay, here it is right here. All right, quo warranto. Let's read it. Quo warranto. In Old English practice, a writ in a nature of a writ of right for the king against him who claimed or usurped any office, franchise, or liberty, to inquire by what authority he supported his claim in order to determine the right. It lay also in the case of a non-user or long neglect of a franchise. Franchise is corporation. Or misuser or abuser of a franchise, being a writ commanding the defendant to show by what warrant he exercises such a corporate franchise, having never had any grant of it, or having forfeited it by neglect or abuse. A common law writ designed to test whether a person exercising power is legally entitled to do so. An extraordinary proceeding, prerogative in nature, addressed to preventing a continued exercise of authority unlawfully asserted. Johnson versus Manhattan Railroad Company, New York, recorded at volume 289, United States, page 479. Now, it is intended to prevent exercise of powers that are not conferred by law, and is not ordinarily available to regulate the manner of exercising such power. Now, what we did, see, police powers are defined as the right of eminent domain of a state or political subdivision to enact laws for the common good and welfare. Let's pull that out. Police power. This is out of Black's Law Dictionary, folks. An authority conferred by the American constitutional system in the 10th Amendment, U.S. Constitution, upon the individual states, and in turn delegated to the local governments, through which they are enabled to establish a special department of police, right? Such laws and regulations as tend to prevent the commission of fraud and or crime, and secure generally the comfort, safety, morals, health, and prosperity of its citizens by preserving the public order and preventing a conflict of rights in the common intercourse of the citizens, and ensuring to each an uninterrupted enjoyment. Everybody will get that word, enjoyment? Of all the privileges conferred upon him or her by the general laws, the Constitution, the power of the state to place restraints on personal freedoms and property rights of persons for the protection of the public safety, health, and morals, or to promotion of the public convenience and general propriety. The police power is subject to limitations of the federal and state constitutions, and everybody catch that, and especially to the requirements of due process. Police power is the exercise of the sovereign right of the government to promote order, safety, security, health, morals, and general welfare within constitutional limitations, right, is an essential attribute. Marshall versus Kansas City, Missouri, recorded at 35 volume, Southwest 2nd, that's another reporter, Southwest 2nd, page 877, all right? Now, Police powers are the right of eminent domain of a state or political subdivision to enact laws for the common good and welfare and to curb crime within constitutional limitations. And the key words in that whole thing are within constitutional limitation. And then it tells you to see the 10th Amendment. And when you see the 10th Amendment, and believe it or not, you can go look up the books, and it divides the 10th Amendment real. Here, pull over there. All right. The burdens placed on the national government as a result of states' regulation, regulation of their internal affairs, save as Congress may act to remove them, constitute normal incidents of operation within the same territory of a dual system of government. And no immunity of national government from such burden is to be implied from the Constitution. All right? All right, Penn Diaries versus Milk Control Commission, all right? A Pennsylvania case, recorded at Volume 318, U.S. 261. The people of the United States residing within any state are subject to two governments, one state and the other national. But there need be no conflict between the two because the powers which one possesses, the other does not. That's United States versus Cruikshank, a very famous Supreme Court case. Within the area of delegated powers, expressed or implied, this amendment does not reduce the powers of the United States. That's U.S. versus Manning. Recorded at 215, Federal Supplement, that's another reporter, page 272. The Federal Union has only those powers expressly conferred on it, and those reasonably implied from powers granted, while each state has all governmental powers except such as the people by the Constitution have conferred on the United States, denied to the state or reserved to the people themselves. Anderson versus Gladden, recorded at Volume 188, Federal Supplement 666. That's a bad number. All right? It is when federal legislation attempts to confer power upon the national government that it is not within the express or implied powers given by the Constitution that the legislation becomes vulnerable to this amendment. Okay? Now, what are we talking about here? Brady Bill? Huh? They're not within their powers. They have no 10th Amendment powers to take away the Second Amendment. Does that make sense to everybody? They don't have any powers to go and take away the Second Amendment or any other amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, nothing. And the Ninth Amendment precluded them from adding on to the Constitution in such a way that would take away the powers. The Ninth Amendment and the Tenth Amendment, they're totally locked out from doing a lot of the things that they do. But see, you got to know that and be able to timely exercise it. So it's very important to understand your Tenth Amendment powers. Now, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary and proper, and this is what we did. This is what we did to help out Dr. Kevorkian. We made sure that his lawyer got this knowledge. We went in there and we dug up a writ of quo warranto. A writ of quo warranto. Alright? Now, this doesn't look like much, but let me tell you something. What we're talking about doing here, see, most cities, at least in the state of Michigan, are by Public Act 230 Public Acts or Public Act 287 of Public Acts, and in every one of them there is a rights and powers section. Usually it's recorded at 2.2 or 3.1, and it basically says, and I quote, subject to the Constitution of the United States and the general laws of the state of Michigan, the city of or the township of has rights and powers too. And then it starts listing the rights and powers. Right to have a police department, right to have a fire department, right to have a city hall, right? And it starts listing all these powers. Now, the antithesis to the argument is that if they're not within the Constitution of the United States and the general laws of the state of Michigan, they don't have any rights and powers. Does that make sense to everybody? In other words, they're in violation of their corporate charter, their franchise. They promised they would be within the Constitution of the United States and the general laws of the state of Michigan. Now, a lot of people, they don't understand the power of this argument, so I want to really push this one home. I want you to understand. Whenever these little townships and these little cities and what have you, they start acting like King Farouk and that you don't matter and that they don't got to listen to you, this is what I want you to do. You ask them a point question and ask them, are you violating my constitutionally secured civil rights by however you claim they are? Because if you are, you have just waived your right to be the city of. And they'll laugh at you for a little bit, okay? Then you explain to him Public Act 230 of Public Acts, which states the rights and powers section, subject to the Constitution of the United States and the general laws of the state of Michigan. You have rights and powers. The antithesis to that argument is if you're not going to be within the Constitution of the United States or the general laws of the state of Michigan and you're going to violate my constitutional rights and trample my rights, what we're going to do here is we're going to go for a writ of mandamus in quo warranto. Well, that's a legal term, fancy legal term. But it is an ancient law that goes way back to England in the ancient times. And basically here is a judgment and a capious action for it, right? You put down here the case. The case came on regularly for trial before the Honorable, and you put the judge's name in there, whatever it is, on a jury trial or non-jury trial, dated such and such. The name appeared as for your counsel, and the name appeared for opposing counsel, right? The court heard the testimony and examined the proofs offered by the parties. The court considered itself fully advised in the premise, filed in its findings of fact and conclusions of law, and directed that judgments be entered in accordance with such findings, right? Which means they figured out that they violated your constitutional rights. They didn't have a right to violate your constitutional rights, and in the hearing you showed they violated your constitutional rights, and the judge figured out they violated your constitutional rights. So now, for your prayer for relief, we're going to get this quo warranto. And this is exactly what happened to the Honorable Dr. Kevorkian. You'll notice that he was in jail and they were hammering the tail at him. The next thing you know, everything got real quiet. Nobody said nothing. And then the next thing you know, they were letting him go and they were minding their business. Now, this is how it happened. It is therefore ordered and adjudged and decreed. 1. Defendant corporation, the city of, you put down what name, has violated provisions of the act under which it was created, and also has violated provisions of Public Act 230 of Public Act Section 2.2 Rights and Powers Section. In other words, it didn't uphold the Constitution of the United States or the general laws of the state of Michigan. Defendant corporation, the city of, whatever, Pontiac, whatever, accordingly has forfeited its charter and become liable to be dissolved by the abuse of its power. How much money am I talking about here, folks? We'd be in about 9 decimal places plus, wouldn't you think? Now, do you think they're going to bother some little doctor when they're looking at shutting down a major city? What do you think's going to happen? Everything's going to get quiet and they're going to let the good doctor go. Same thing for you. Now, defendant corporation, you name them, therefore is dissolved, and the corporate rights, privileges, and franchise of defendants are declared forfeited to the people. Defendant corporation, you name them, as trustees, directors, managers, and other official officers, attorneys, and agents, are forever restrained and enjoined from exercising any of the corporate franchise powers, rights, and or privileges previously exercised by defendants at city, and from collecting or receiving any debts and or demands belonging to or held by defendant, city, whatever, and from paying out or in any manner interfering with, transferring, or delivering to any person any of the deposits, money, securities, property, and effects of the defendant's city or held by it. You name a trustee, which the state would do, probably the Attorney General, after your complaint is filed, is appointed receiver of all of the property, real and personal things in action and effects of defendant city corporation held by and vested in defendants or in or to which defendant may be in any wise interested or entitled thereto. Plaintiff, the people of the state of whatever, that's us, state of Michigan, shall recover of defendant corporation, whatever, city of, the sum of damages, real and personal. Got me? They don't like that when you start talking that because they can go 100 million 3 times that amount punitive damages. They get a little upset. As costs and disbursements of this action, and the receivers is directed to pay this sum out of their pocket to whoever, the Attorney General, but you can have a person stipulated on there as an injured party. Now you put down there the Honorable Judge so-and-so presiding, date entered, and he signs that, and that city is no longer a city. You see, when they violate your Constitution, this is one of the most powerful tools that you can use. And when you jam this on, you better wear a bulletproof vest to court, but you're probably going to get shot at by the time you get home. But it's nice to threaten. You know, you just threaten. just drop one of them in the mail and say, if I don't get reasonable cause for my action in the near future, you're going to get one of these in the mail for real. Here is a summons for Quo Warranto. This is for the start of the thing. Right here. Summons. Form 41. By the way, you can get this in 21 AM Juris Forms and Practice. In practical forms and practice. Alright? You name the party, you put down there who you are, the people of the state of Michigan versus you are summoned to appear before which and which court on such and such a date to show by what authority you claim to have, use, and or enjoy the rights and liberties and franchise, namely the corporation city of, set out and complained of in such and such a time, summons, and further to do and receive all things which the court shall then order concerning you. This is kind of like pulling their driver's license for drunk driving. Now that's an oversimplification, but sometimes these city halls operate like a drunken sailor. And they just think they can abuse citizens' rights and trash them. You know who I am? No, I don't care. You know who I am? I'm your boss. I'm the people. You're elected to work for me. And I'm trying to be nice, so I'd appreciate it if we can sit down and work this out. But if we can't work this out, I'm going to sock it to you, baby. You got me? And that's basically how I feel about it. Now, we can get into some of these other things. Right here. This is a very important point. I'm trying to get this across to people, and you try and tell them, and they kind of look at you with this blank, starry-eyed look. But in the Constitution of the state of Michigan, the latest and greatest, the very first thing they talk about, notice it says Section 1. All political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for their equal benefit, security, and protection. Now let me ask you a question. Do you feel equal benefit? I don't. You know? Equal protection and discrimination. No person shall be denied the equal protection of the laws. Right? Nor shall any person be denied the enjoyment of the civil or political rights, or be discriminated against in the exercise thereof, because of religion, race, color, or national origin. The legislature shall implement this section by appropriate legislation. You know? And they start going down through all freedom of worship. You know? I mean, this is what we're talking about here, folks. You know your rights, you got them. You don't know them, you don't got them. You get back in here to police powers generally. This is something you got to understand. Generally, the police power is the exercise of the sovereign right of the government to promote order, safety, and health and morals, and the general welfare of the society within constitutional limits. Within constitutional limits. Did everybody hear that? Within constitutional limits. Generally, the police power is the exercise of the sovereign right of the government to promote order, safety, health, and moral, and general welfare of the society within the constitutional limits. As otherwise stated, the police power of the state is a power or organization of a system of regulations to foster the health, order, and comfort of the people, and to prevent and or punish injuries and offenses to the public. Right? But it has to be within constitutional limitations, and it embraces all rules for the protection of life, liberty, and property. I mean, that's a contradiction of logic today, folks. That doesn't happen. You and I both know it. I mean, who are they kidding? They ain't kidding me. Okay? So, it's up to you, and it's up to me. And we got to get a hold of this book right here. You get a hold of this Constitution, and you start learning that Constitution, and you quote a chapter and verse, and guess what? You'll notice a unique, different change. One, after a while, they start to listen. And you actually affect what is called positive change. And every time they see you, and that goofy hat you wear, they go, oh, for God's sake, don't give that guy no ticket. I have actually been pulled over, listening to the program. Didn't have no plates on my car. Policeman called, he says, you got positive ID on the guy? And a friend of mine was taping it off his police radio. He said, yeah, it's him. He said, well, for God's sake, don't give that guy no ticket. And the guy says, Sarge, he ain't got no plates on his car. I said, I don't give a damn what he ain't got on his car. Don't give that guy no ticket. He said, but Sarge, he told me he's just been waiting to fight it and beat it all the way to the Supreme Court, and I wrote that on the ticket. He says, you give that guy a ticket? I said, I just told you not to give that guy a ticket. What are you, deaf? You got some problem with your hearing? He said, I told you not to give that guy a ticket. Now, why did you give that guy a ticket? He said, Sarge, he ain't got no plates on the car. I said, I told you I don't care what he ain't got on the car. This is all recorded on a radio broadcast. So everybody was laughing. The police were laughing. Everybody was laughing. His buddies were laughing. They were ribbing him over the radio. The sergeant told him, all right, knock it off. Clear the net. This is serious. He said, fine. He said, you give him a ticket? He says, fine. He says, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I want you to be in here when the city attorney comes in here. And he says, you're going to personally deliver the ticket to him, and he ain't going to be real happy with you. Because he hates that guy. Every time he goes to court, that guy blows his doors off. He looks like a fool. You give the guy a ticket. Now he's got to go to court. So sure enough, we go to court. Come up before the court. Judge starts operating like a prosecutor. He starts asking me all kind of discovery question. I call it as soon as they call the case. Now this is something important. You got to understand. You're going to be your own attorney, then you got to know all the programming. When you hear him call your case, you get off your tail feather and you run right up there as quick and as expediently as possible without knocking anybody down. And you say, ready, Your Honor. You state your appearance. I'm so-and-so, hearing before this honorable court. I'm standing as my own counsel. In my state, it's under Article 1, Section 13. I've appointed myself my own attorney, and I'm ready to proceed with my administrative and procedural matters. And at this time, Your Honor, may it please the court, I motion for dismissal with prejudice, failure to state a cause of action for which relief can be granted. Bingo. Now, I apologize if I'm talking too fast. I'm going to try and slow down a little bit. But when you're in court as much as I am, you just learn. You either talk fast or you lose. So I apologize if I'm going a little too fast. I'm going to slow down. I'm trying to make it easier for you folks, okay? But the judge bips off right away. Well, you got a ticket on such and such. I said, oh, Your Honor. I said, are you the judge, the disinterested third party that's trying this case? The trier of fact? He said, yes. I said, okay. I said, is this the prosecutor over here to my right? He said, yeah, that's him. I said, okay. I said, are you going to prosecute this case, Your Honor? He said, no, I'm the judge. I said, then why are you asking discovery questions? Well, I just want to find out what's going on. I says, isn't that his job over there? That's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to present his case as the prosecutor, trier of the case. You're the trier of fact, he's the trier of the case. So if you're going to operate as the judge and the prosecutor, I'm going to object on the record as a mistrial. He said, okay, I'll let you enter that on the record. Go ahead. I said, okay, let it be entered on the record as an appealable issue. He said, okay. He said, now it's on the record. He said, let me ask you this. Did you get a ticket on September the 30th? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, let me ask you this. Do you have any plates on your car? I says, no, sir. And I don't intend to get any. And of course, all the people in the court, oh, this guy's going to jail. Watch this. This is going to be good. He says to me, he says, I assume you have a very good reason for that. And I said, yes, sir, and I shut up. I waited. He said, can I hear it? I said, well, Your Honor, I said, I'm an unfranchised common law free man. I'm not a participant in any tontine schemes of limited liability and a joint venture for profit with an insurable interest requiring me to participate in these corporate Ponzi schemes. I'm just a little Joe from Kokomo. I live on the block. I travel at the common law. I have a right to travel freely unencumbered pursuant to Shapiro versus Thompson, and that right is so basic it doesn't even need to be mentioned. The state of Michigan arbitrarily and erroneously converted my right into a privilege and issued a license plate and a fee for it. Murdoch versus Pennsylvania says no state may convert a secured liberty into a privilege and issue a license and a fee for it. And if they do, Shuttlesworth versus Birmingham, Alabama says I can ignore the license and engage in a right with impunity. That means you can't punish me. Since I have relied on previous decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court and on constitutional defenses, I have a perfect defense for willfulness. I am immune to the prosecution. Therefore, prosecution counsel does not have a cause of action for which relief can be granted. I motion for dismissal with prejudice for failure to state a cause of action for which relief can be granted, and I kind of like to collect my costs and fees for having to defend this frivolous case. The judge starts reading the ticket. Told officer he'd just been waiting to get this ticket so he could fight it and beat it all the way to the Supreme Court. He laughed. He says, motion granted, and he ran off the bench before I could get my damages. So I went out in the hall. He went to the can. I waited for him. He came out of the can. I served him with my papers. He said, you didn't have to do that. I said, well, I didn't want you to be inconvenienced, Judge. He said, okay. He signed. I went back in the court as a casual thing just to see what kind of reaction would happen, and I sat down. About 2 cases later, this elderly gentleman gets up, and he stands up there, and he says, Your Honor, I'm not quite as knowledgeable as that young gentleman that was here just 2 cases ago, and I don't presume to understand all of the issues that he raised. But it really sounded good to me, and I'd kind of like to ditto everything he said on top of my case. Everybody broke out laughing. The judge says, all right, how many guys here didn't have no plates on their car? About 5 guys raised their hand. He says, okay, everybody dismissed. Get the hell out of here. And everybody broke out laughing. It was like, at the carnival on Christmas or something. It was a carnival atmosphere. So I'm telling you, you can affect change. And see, they had all figured. They said, watch this guy's going to jail. And then all of a sudden, boom, out jumped. And I'm telling you, it's this little book right here. This book. You know what's in this book? You have power. Knowledge is power. You know what's in this book, and you know how to exercise your rights in a timely fashion. You have constitutional rights. And if you exercise them, and you utilize good judgment, and be courteous, and just treat people the way you like to be treated, with a little dignity. Most of the time, 99% of the time, I win. Now, I will tell you, I've been to jail. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. But when I go to jail, they really hate it, because I usually get, the last time I got 5 guys' cases retried, and I got another 4 guys out, like within 24 hours, and then I got 11 guys off of their case because they signed up for drug rehab. And one bank robber come up to me and said to me, I think you know I'm a hard case. I said, yeah, I kind of gathered that. He says, I want you to know you changed my life. He said, I really appreciate you helping me with my paperwork. He says, they're going to give me a new chance. They're going to let me out on probation. I'm going to marry my girlfriend. And he started crying, and he basically said, I'll never forget you, Pops. He says, you're some kind of guy. He says, God bless you. And he says, I want you to know I really appreciate what you did. And I found God, too. And between you and Crazy Charlie, he said, Crazy Charlie is a minister that goes around to all the jails. He used to ride for the outlaw motorcycle gang. Crazy Charlie is clearly crazy. The last time I saw Crazy Charlie, he was riding down 8 Mile Road at 85 miles an hour, standing on his seat against another guy standing on his seat to see who was going to wimp out first. Crazy Charlie did about 5 years in the slam because he got charged with murdering some guy. Crazy Charlie went to jail and he found God. And God spared Crazy Charlie from a life sentence in jail. And Crazy Charlie owes it to God, and he goes through all of the jails and he preaches the gospel. And he basically is quite a gentleman, and he's nobody to screw with. And when we went to chapel, the kids were all joking around. Pops, you going to chapel? I said, oh, hell yeah. He says, Pops, you're a badass. What you want to go to chapel for? I said, let me tell you something, my man. You can always learn something, and I'll tell you, one of the best places to learn it is at chapel. So why don't you come on down and you might learn something. We go down there, and who do I see? Crazy Charlie. I hadn't seen Crazy Charlie for years. He looked at me, I looked at him, he said, what the hell are you doing here? I said, I don't want to talk about it, Crazy Charlie. The guy turns around to me, he says, Pops, is there anybody in this joint you don't know? I says, I'll tell you what, this guy's a guy I would listen to. Because he's serious. The man is serious, and he found God, and he's going to try and help you find God. And in the end, you will have peace. Well, this gentleman, this one bank robber, found this gentleman, and between myself and Crazy Charlie, he found God, and I wish you could see the peace on his face. He was in a lot of trouble. And we did his paperwork for him. We helped him. And, basically, they redid his whole program, and because he found God, they decided to put him out on lifetime parole. He made restitution. He gave the money back. He changed his whole life. His whole life was changed just from that instant. So I'm telling you, when I go into jail, it's hilarious because it's like the jailers don't even know how to act. And it's like, the one jailer told me when I left, he shook my hand. He says, I'm going to miss you, Pops. He said, they call me Pops because I'm older. I was a little teed off when they called me Pops the first time, so I told this kid, I said, what's with the Pops? I said, I bet you can't even do 25 push-ups. He said, you're probably right, Pops, can you? Boom, down I went, 25 out, and here's how I'll raise your 25, and here's another 25. Pops, you're in good shape. I said, I'm going to show you how good a shape I'm in. You keep calling me Pops. He says, no, you don't understand, Pops. He said, if you're an older gentleman in the joint, they treat you with courtesy. They call you Pops. That's just out of courtesy. I said, oh, I guess you can call me Pops, and that's cool. So don't you ever think that I'm getting old. So I'll fool you. So they laughed. When I left, they lined up to shake my hand, and even the jailer said he was going to be sorry to see me go because I was helping so many people, and people were getting their lives together. And so when I go to jail, it's kind of unique. I actually did a vacation. I got the top bunk, and I laid on the window and let God's sun shine in my face, and I got a suntan. And guys would say, Pops, why do you climb up on the top bunk? I says, man, I'm out on the beach getting sun and rays. What are you doing? He said, you know, Pops, you something else. You're going to make, you in jail, and you're going to make, I said, I'm laying out here on the beach. What you talking about? I'm laying on my bed right next to the window, and the sun comes right through, and I'm on the beach. What you talking about? Getting a suntan. So you got to make the best of where you're at, no matter what. It keeps your spirits up. And the bottom line is this. I wouldn't have been in jail if I could have more effectively argued my Constitution. I ended up having to do a brief from the jail, 28 pages. I sharpened the pencil on the phone on the wall. Here it is. This is a 28-page motion to dismiss. This is more than that. This right here. This right here. I mean, this is all from hand, longhand. And when we got to court, the judge looked at it. He goes, "Sir, are you an attorney?" I says, "No." He says, "You ever been to law school?" I says, "No, sir." He says, "You did this from jail?" I says, "Yes, sir." He says, "You did this from jail from memory?" I says, "Yes, sir." It's rather extensive. It's huge. Meanwhile, the prosecutor kicks in. She says, "Judge, do I got to answer this?" He goes, "Oh, hell yeah." This guy is kind of like this guy on Night Court on TV and Channel 2, kind of flippant. And he says, "Oh, hell yeah, counselor." He says, "What's this, a new hobby you just took up?" He says, "This guy even did his own proposed order. I don't even have to fill out an order." And he says, "Not only that, I want it done by 8 o'clock Monday morning." So all weekend she had to go to the law library and answer all this stuff. She was not a happy camper. So then she proposed that I have to have a shrink check my bolts out to see if my batteries are charged. Because if you defend your Constitution, you've got to be a crazy turkey. And she found out I'm pretty well squared away. I just argued my Constitution. I asked the judge, I says, "Has it gotten this bad yet, Judge? Or where you got tossed in a nut house because you defend your Constitution?" He says, "Not in my court."
And I've heard of judges speaking up and saying, well, the Constitution has no place in my court. How can they even think about that?
Boy, that is a very serious statement. Because what that judge just did in an open court of law under Title 18 United States Code Section 2381 is he just committed an act of treason. See, the judge is sworn under Article 11 in this state, Paragraph 1, that he will uphold the Constitution of the United States and move as most immediately as is practicable to defend the Constitution. And a violation of that act would be capital felony treason under the people and government of the United States of America, and he would be subject, upon conviction, to be hung by the neck.
Is it possible if the defendant had a driver's license and they were trying to argue a traffic matter, then they were kind of in the system already and raised a constitutional objection that the judge might say it doesn't apply?
Well, here's how we start a lot of these traffic cases, and I'll get right into that. The issue, when you first walk before a traffic court, you see, when they merged these courts together in 1963, they screwed up. They wanted to lay off half the judges, see. And they only wanted to have one building. So what they did is they merged the traffic court per se, or that docket, into the criminal court docket. And when they did that, they didn't check the rules, you see. And when they didn't check the rules, they didn't allow for jurisdictional challenges between the two courts. So what happens now is, you come before the court, and there's several ways you can come before the court. Now, this gentleman here is correct. When he's talking about you have a driver's license, you have entered into a contractual relationship with the state. In other words, it's not a lawful contract because you cannot enter into an unlawful contract. You understand? It is a contract, though, because it's recognized as a contract. Because you have voluntarily entered into this contract, you agreed to all of the rules in their law book for that contract. Now, this is what we call admiralty and maritime jurisdiction or artificial jurisdiction. And it's a rather heavy argument going into Erie Railroad versus Tompkins and McCulloch versus Maryland, and we'll go into that in depth at the end of this program, but I wanted to share with you briefly. When you sign your driver's license, and especially today, and your voter's registration card, you will notice a little note right under your signature where you agree to the acceptance of the duality of citizenship of not only at the common law, but you accept the national jurisdiction under admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, which allows you to be sucked into all of these uniform commercial code requirements. And this is a very serious thing you're signing here. You don't understand it, but you just sold all your constitutional rights down the sewer when you signed that document. So when you sign it, my honest advice, and this is from experience, you sign the thing, and right at the end of your name, you write UD. U period, D period. At the end of your name, and underneath your name, you write 1-207 without prejudice. Now, what that does, it says, I'll be glad to accept your ridiculous privilege. I don't really need to, but I will just to keep myself from being in trouble with the cops. And I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll exercise our Uniform Commercial Code caveat that allows us to keep all of our constitutional rights. In other words, my signature is not really a signature of contract, it's a signature of convenience that allows me to get a piece of paper to put in my pocket for identification purposes, that allows me to sign my checks and do whatever I got to do. But it doesn't in any way make any admissions or confessions or require me to participate in any of your rulebook schemes under your Admiralty and Maritime Tontine scheme. Now, to tell you how crazy it was, I just got asked by an attorney how he would defend a program where a gentleman that he was defending was accused of hijacking a car. And that they were claiming that because the car is made all over the world and all over the United States, that the parts, even though they're assembled at one point, they are in what is called the interstate jurisdiction. And that because of that, this crime was now a federal crime. You understand? This is how far-reaching this thing has gotten. And when this gentleman signed his driver's license, he had no idea that he was entering into this thing and waiving all of his God-given constitutional rights, and that he was no longer a common law citizen, that he was actually under Admiralty and Maritime jurisdiction. Now, when we pull up some of these statutory requirements, it's an interesting thing that you brought up. But what they do is these regulations are never enacted into law. We'll show you something on that just a little bit later, but they're not enacted into law. They just make a regulation, and because you voluntarily enter into this contract, all of these regulations just come up as enforceable to you, even though you don't know any better. Now, we have a Fair Credit Reporting Act that says if you make any loan or you get involved in any kind of a credit relationship, they got to tell you everything about how much the interest rate is, what the payments are, how long the payments are. I mean, they got to tell you every single thing about the contract. And in theory, all contracts, you're supposed to know all of the facts in regard to the contract. They just make the contract one-sided. And they figure, well, these people are not that well informed. They're not real bright. We'll just get them to sign this on their driver's license, and they'll voluntarily acquiesce into the situation, and then we can throw all of these regulations at them, and they'll never know how we hit them. So it's very important that you understand when you sign something, read it, for sure. If you don't understand everything that's down there, take it to somebody and ask some questions before you sign it. Because once you sign it, it's harder to get out of. But I highly recommend everybody lose their wallet and go down and redo their driver's license and sign the thing UD when you sign it, and put 1-207 without prejudice. Because right then and there, you cut off all of this Admiralty and Maritime jurisdiction, and you return back to your contract law of what? You're a common law citizen living at the common law. And they can have their contract, but it's not enforceable. Why is it not enforceable? Because you can state that you signed it under duress. Well, how do I know that? Look, I put UD right after my name. U period D period. What do you think that means? Under development? Under the deck? That means under duress. When I signed this, I was under duress. I didn't voluntarily sign this. I had to sign this, or the cops were going to cuff me about the head. You see, I was under threat, intimidation, coercion. I still believe that I have a right to travel freely and unencumbered. Notice you're not driving. You have a right to travel. The customary usage of the right to travel today is you get in a car. You don't go down to 7-Eleven on your bicycle, you get in your car. You want to go down and pick up a carton of milk, you get in your car. Another unique argument along these lines is, well, Judge, I asked this judge, I says, let me ask you a question, Judge. If I get in my car, the Constitution was still in effect in full force before I got in my car, right? Why not? Now, when I got in my car and I had my gun, it was still in effect, right? But when I closed the door, the Constitution was suspended. Everybody broke out laughing. How could that be? The act of getting in the car and closing the door made the Second Amendment unconstitutional. I said, that's totally ludicrous. How could that possibly be? You see, they have passed these laws and they've gotten away with it for so long that it's kind of like a bank robber that's robbed 25 banks in a row, and on the 26th is a little miff that you getting excited. Man, I've done this 25 times. What's the big deal? Now you're going to bust me on the 26th time and you're going to get all upset. See, they've been getting away with it so long, nobody's ever taken them to the task, and they feel like, well, I should be able to get away with it on the 26th time. An unconstitutional act, wrongfully done. Doesn't matter how many times in a row you did it, it's still unconstitutional. And the reality is, a person that's properly motivated, properly trained, and properly willing to do whatever is necessary and proper to defend the Constitution will almost always prevail on the merits. And that's what we're doing right now, and they're sweating on that right now. But the reality of this is, and you got to understand, the burden is on you. You want your Constitution, and you damn well better grab a hold of it, and you better hold on tight, and you don't let go for nothing. You read your Constitution, you learn your Constitution, you quote your Constitution chapter and verse, frontwards, backwards, upside down. When people come up to you, well, we want you to take a drug test as part of your job. Go fish. I ain't taking no drug test. I'm not required to prove a negative. You're required to prove a positive. If you think I'm doing something negligent, fine. Then you go file papers and you take necessary precautions and what have you, and we'll go to court. I says, but I'm not going to be convicted before the fact, and then I got to provide evidence that I'm not guilty. That's the cart before the horse. That's back asswards. We're not going to do that. Not only that, the Fifth Amendment says I got a right not to be a participant in a compulsory process that's going to make an incriminating situation to me. Now, I'm not nothing to hide, and I'm not even arguing from what I got to hide. I'm arguing from the fact that the right stands and I'm exercising it. And then I usually ask some simple questions. Well, if they find anything when I get fired, hell yeah. You're going to be penalized. So there are penalties. And if they find anything when I be criminally prosecuted, could be. Huh? So why would you want to do some damn stupid thing like that? And give them a piss test. This guy comes up to me at the last convention we had, and they want to take a test as to whether or not he's got any drugs in his system. I said, first of all, what's in my system is between me and my doctor, and none of your damn business. I said, I don't take drugs, but I got nothing to hide. But I'm not going to voluntarily enter into anything. What if your guy screws up and now you say I got drugs? Now I can't get a job ever? What, are you kidding me? There's some new hobby you just took up? I'm not going to play that game. It is not my burden to prove a negative. It is your burden to prove a positive. If you have a just claim for which relief can be granted, you go file your papers and we'll sit down and talk. But until such time, you go fish. Because I'm not going to play. I'm not required to play, and I'm not going to play. And if you fire me for the exercise of my constitutional right, I'm going to tell you about Miller versus United States, which says, the claim and exercise of a constitutional right shall not be converted into a crime. And you're doing that, and you're punishing me. And if you fire me for it, I will sue your socks off and attach everything you own, bank, business, and home. Now make my day. That's how I feel about it. So you find another turkey to jerk with, but I'm not going to play, okay?
I find this to be very helpful. I never knew the Constitution until I actually started watching Carl Miller, and who would have known that the government would hide all these rights from you, and if you don't know them, it's too bad for you. Is that our government? The government that you pay all your taxes to? Is that what you're paying your taxes for? Is for them to lie to you and basically revenue you and slave you? This is the government? I say hell no. Learn your Constitution, especially the part where you go into your DMV and get a new license and sign it under duress. And then under your signature, put 1-207 without prejudice. And then that will put you back to common law, because this is what I'm saying. The government are snakes, and they're not who you think they are. So learn the Constitution so you can fight back for your rights. I thought this was a great video. I'm going to put another one out as soon as possible. And I advise you to watch it multiple times and learn the Constitution. This guy is like 101 Constitution man. He will teach you stuff, and then after you learn all this stuff, read all the books he told you. You know, learn the law. These are your God-given rights. Hey, subscribe. Love y'all. Have a great day.